Hi folks, I'm Duncan Gill, child and adolescent psychiatrist.
And I'm Victoria Lee, licensed clinical mental health counselor, and welcome to Is There a Med for That? The podcast about teen mental health and behavioral problems and what to do about them.
Victoria and I have been working for years together with kids. Sometimes we use therapy, sometimes medication, sometimes we give some guidance to parents.
And sometimes kids just need to be left alone.
We don't have all the answers, but we probably have some of them. We'll do our best to share what we've learned over the years working with struggling kids and their families.
We hope you enjoy the show and we can be helpful to those who have taken on the hardest job in the world, being a parent. All right. Good afternoon, everybody.
Hi, Victoria. How's it going?
Good. Hello, Duncan. Good. You're doing good today.
So far.
It's
a live show, I understand.
A little pressure.
We're going to have to behave.
Oh, no. I'm pretty good at that usually. Worried about you, but...
It might be a problem. I actually haven't talked to you about this yet, but...
Oh, no.
Yeah, I had a dream about you last night.
Oh, God. Here we go.
It's totally true. I'm totally not kidding. But it was actually an upsetting dream. We've been doing a lot of podcast work, and it's interesting listening in the car and feel like you don't know where this is going, do you?
No, and we're live.
That's the best part. Listening to the show, and we talked a lot about adversarial dynamics. And
this isn't a pickup line, right?
I'm not going to do that on the show. We'll see on the way back.
We took separate cars for
the record. It's because you're afraid of driving with me now.
Yes.
So I was listening a lot to our adversarial dynamic, taking space. I don't know if you remember. I'll remind you and listeners real quick. But it was about going up into your daughter's bedroom and saying, hey, did you empty the dishwasher? And then her saying, go to hell.
Screw off.
Yeah. And then resisting the urge to just get into a fight and yell and threaten things that you don't mean. But I sort of incorporated that into a dream because I told you I felt sort of like I was conversing with you whenever I was in
listen to the podcast.
It's very strange.
Yeah.
But so I had this it was unsettling to begin with. So it really was a nightmare. I was already feeling unsettled, and I was in this house, and I was in a downstairs room trying to clean or something like that. And
we know it's a dream.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen.
Yeah. I was trying to be very quiet because I knew something bad would happen if I was going to wake somebody up or something. And, I moved something and made a noise. I heard this crash upstairs. My heart's pounding. And believe it or not, you came bursting through the door screaming at me.
My goodness.
I thought you were going to attack me, actually. It was like a wake up and yeah. So anyways.
Wow. I was going to punish you.
You totally were.
Wow.
Or throw me out the window or give me the finger or something.
Adversarial dynamic.
Yeah.
Wow.
So anyways.
Maybe we should have a conversation later about our relationship and how you're feeling.
So I hope you feel relieved after my explanation.
Good. And our second episode coming up next is going to be on giving up punishing and rewarding with your kids. So it's a good one.
Maybe you'll have a nice dream tomorrow.
I hope so.
And you'll,
I
don't know, apologize
like
or
there's
something.
some stuff we need to talk about.
It might be some deep-seated issues, but...
We know, we definitely know that's true.
Anyways, I'm feeling a little manic today. We're going to do bipolar disorder.
Perfect.
I'm a little scattered, but I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying the feeling right now.
Great.
And I think I talked to you before about the fact that bipolar is pretty heavy in my family.
Yes.
So
I always think of your dad's book.
Yeah. So there's a little plug. My father did David Gill, MD, did a book called The Joy of Bipolar and Other Mixed Blessings. And that's available on
Kindle?
Amazon. Yeah, Amazon Kindle. But he's been fascinating. He's been, 50 years or 40 years psychiatrist and always fascinated with bipolar disorder. I sort of inherited that, but he's not exactly manic depressive, but he definitely has some traits. He literally owns 140 banjos and guitars. One of the traits of bipolar disorder is profligate spending, is buying many of the same thing. If he buys a shirt, he literally buys 3 of them. He, for some reason, collects doors. So we probably have a few hundred doors in the house just sitting, waiting to be installed someplace that can't be installed. Anyways, and he works 3 jobs, but he's a functional bipolar, I would say. But I do have other family members who used to dance in the rain naked at night, and think that
Me too, but for other reasons, I think.
other members who thought there were people with machine guns in the trees and legitimate stuff. So
Wow, it's heavy.
it's sort of a family interest,
Blessing
I
and
would
a
say.
curse.
It's a blessing and a curse. And I'm glad you said that. So anyways, this is a show about kids. So I was going to talk about bipolar disorder in kids. This is probably only one of about 30 episodes being bipolar, but I wanted to start with bipolar disorder in adults because you really don't have much of a shot of understanding in kids unless you can understand it in adults.
Good point.
So that's one advantage treatment providers, therapists, docs, nurse practitioners have of working on an inpatient unit first and then working with kids after, is you really have a sense of what bipolar disorder is and can become. Because when you're seeing kids, they don't have the full thing usually.
So when you see it more full blown, you tend to understand the nuances of it better.
Yes. You know where it can go. You know what it looks like. You know what milder versions look like. And a lot of kids outgrow certain things, so they present with some signs and they overcome it. Their brains develop or something, and many don't. But so I was going to start with adults and then maybe next time go on to kids.
Great.
What do you think?
I love it.
How am I doing so far?
I can hardly
Now that
keep
we're past the
up.
dream, it's okay.
Starting to feel way more comfortable. Keep going.
So adult bipolar disorder looks like a disorder. It looks like neurology. You cannot miss it. It's not a touchy-feely, sort of vague, halfway thing. And that's what I like. That's what the scientist in me likes. It's a definitive. And you've definitely seen it in our program.
Yep.
When we get 18, 19, 20-year-olds.
Yeah.
It's the older ones. And the reason you don't see bipolar disorder in younger folks, and there's a lot of, docs will say, gee, we can't diagnose in a young person. There is truth to that. It doesn't develop until later in life. And I think I've said this in another episode, but major mental illness, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder doesn't develop until 19, 20, 21. It usually happens when kids are going to college or graduate from high school right at the tail end. And that's just a fact. It's just a medical thing and nobody knows why. But 19, 20, 21, you start to see it. And it's impressive when you see it. So classic bipolar disorder is sort of described as manic and depressive episodes. And it can look like that. And that's the most dramatic. But I wanted to get to mixed episodes and lesser versions and more confusing presentations because they're probably more important because they're less obvious and these folks can fly under the radar and not get treatment or get the wrong treatment.
And maybe, would you say it's more common or would you say it's less common?
Mixed is more common, I would say. And if you treat it, at least pharmacologically, like bipolar disorder, you'll have success. And if you treat it like depression, you often won't. If you treat it as a personality disorder, you often won't. So it's important to get that more nuanced version that's a mixed episode. But starting with the most obvious.
Maybe too for the listeners at home real quick, they used to call it manic depression, right?
Correct.
When did they change that to bipolar?
That is a great question. I want to say they sort of overlapped a bit, maybe in the 80s.
Okay.
And increasingly it's called bipolar disorder. I don't know if they think it's less disparaging or critical somehow. That's a good question. I'm not sure exactly why they changed it, but it's probably something to do with that, making it sound less like an pejorative, I guess. But we can start with the depressed side. And the depressed side of bipolar disorder can look like the depressed side of just depression. And that's one of the confusing things. Already we're getting to the confusion. Is some folks will initially present with a depressed phase. And one of the...
Like an episode.
An episode. So they'll come in and they'll look depressed. And you'll ask, and you won't have much of a history of manic stuff in the past. So it's a common assumption, I think, an erroneous one, that you cannot diagnose bipolar disorder if there hasn't been a manic episode in the past. Sometimes a manic episode hasn't shown up. And sometimes you'll have signs that, you'll have suggestions that this is more likely a bipolar problem than a depressed problem. You look at family history, and parents are bipolar, or you get some other clues that we can talk about. And if you go in with this black and white view that this has to be depression, not bipolar disorder, you may cause a lot of problems. Because if you're just waiting for the manic side, you may be waiting a long time because very frequently bipolar disorder is primarily depressed, and you may be waiting years before the manic part and not treating somebody effectively. So
Yeah, and that can be a rough years of life
Yeah.
if you miss that.
and we see a ton of parents like that. We'll see their kids, and the parents will be in, and they never got properly diagnosed and treated, and it's sad.
Yeah, definitely. What do you look for? So like when you said it might present, I hope I'm not jumping ahead of the script here, but what do you look for as a doctor prior, like, so if there wasn't a history of the mania, what are some of those other things?
The main one, and this is a symptom of mania, is a sleep problem. You'll
Yeah.
notice in our intakes, I always ask about sleep, and specifically lack of sleep and not requiring sleep. There is no other diagnosis I can think of.
Except substance use,
Substance use, correct.
where you're up for hours.
When you're up for hours and not
Days.
tired. So these often have kids who don't sleep as babies. As kids, they don't sleep, or it's a very...
Although a lot of babies don't sleep, parents, you don't have to freak out.
That's a good point. That's a good point. I probably just scared thousands of listeners, at least thousands on this live episode, I'm sure. But
Millions.
millions,
our
perhaps, at
listeners.
least. Maybe we'll have to wait for that. But anyway, sleep problems early on, particularly not needing sleep. And you will see that in 12, 13, 14, 15-year-olds.
Yep.
So again, it's not sleeping. A lot of things cause problems. It's not needing sleep, and it's doing things at night.
Yep.
It's up rearranging the room. It's up
Painting.
painting, art,
Writing.
writing. Yeah, you've seen that.
Yep.
Or experienced it perhaps. Lack of sleep. Family history is huge. So a bipolar parent with a kid with depression is bipolar unless proven otherwise, to me. More complicated family histories, suicides, much more common with bipolar disorder than major depression in my experience. It looks more complicated. The history is more complicated. It's also a kid who talks about being depressed and looks fine, unless they're being dramatic.
Yep.
It's or suicide attempts and looking fine.
Yep.
We'll get into that with mixed episodes, but those are the initial clues that shoot, I better be thinking about bipolar disorder as well, or something like a milder form. So the manic episodes, on the other hand, are the ones that can look Hollywood.
Kind of fun.
Kind of fun.
For a little bit, maybe.
Yeah,
until
absolutely.
it really isn't anymore.
Until then, it's not.
Yep.
But it looks like somebody on cocaine, really. People will not stop talking. Like literally, you cannot get words in. Their thoughts race. They sometimes look euphoric. Like, this is the best I've ever felt. I've heard, don't make this feeling go away, doc.
Yep.
This is part of the reason they don't like treatment, is it just feels through the roof good. You know, how do you feel on a 1 to 10 scale? 34. So it can be euphoria, feeling wonderful, feeling invulnerable.
One time I heard someone describe it as I'm biting down on a huge battery.
That is spectacular. Yeah. And that is another thing, is bipolars will come up with phrases you've never thought of like
Wicked,
that.
like beautiful in a lot of ways.
Wonderful phrases. Kid recently was talking about racing thoughts, or an older one, and talked about it felt like he was on a Windows screensaver where it was just going 90 miles an hour with the thing bouncing all around. But that's great, biting on a battery.
Almost like an expansion of the mind.
Yeah.
Mania.
It is.
I'm watching a show on LSD and all the different, drugs that are coming back to being looked at in terms of treatment for mental health.
Hendrix, right? Right. So a lot of artists are bipolar.
Right.
Famous ones. There is bipolar disorder. Everything's on overdrive. Emotions, creativity. So they come up with interesting phrases. They also come up with artwork and writing and music you wouldn't think of otherwise. So there's a reason bipolar disorder has survived the human race, and that is because it's
attractive in a lot of ways.
It confers abilities to people who don't need a lot of sleep. They can be very busy. They can be very creative. And if you tame it, you can continue to have those traits and benefit from superhuman energy.
The joys of being bipolar.
The joys of bipolar. The problem is it's exceptionally dangerous too. And the mood part is out of control sometimes. So it's very hard to keep in check.
I was even thinking, didn't for a while, there was a book written, I forget the name of it, but it's like a memoir of someone's struggles with mental illness. And in the end of the book, he talked about how over the years his diagnosis shifted. And it wasn't because his actual illness changed, but because what doctors recognized. And wasn't there a period in time where a lot of doctors would call some mania like schizophrenia even?
Absolutely. And whenever an older person says mom was schizophrenic, or even younger ones now, because bipolar disorder, I'm just checking how we're doing in time because how are we looking? We're great with time. Great.
Great. Keep
so
going.
Much to talk about. I'll have to talk faster, rapidly.
Symptom number 2.
Schizophrenia. And that's because bipolar disorder, both in the depressed and the manic phase, can have psychosis. And we think touch on that. I'm going to do a whole episode on it. But it breaks with reality. And it either looks like hallucinations, hearing things usually, or delusions, which are fixed false beliefs.
I remember that.
I'm so proud of you, Victoria.
You're a good teacher.
Thank you. So the fixed false beliefs in bipolar disorder usually look like paranoia, thinking the government's after you, thinking people are watching you is the mildest form, but then elaborate plots against you.
Which is interesting too, because you mentioned that it often mimics, cocaine use mania, and that's common with
paranoia.
Yeah.
Too much dopamine.
Yep.
So paranoia is very common. With mania, with depression, it looks like paranoia, and often voices telling them to hurt themselves or somebody else. Almost always themselves. It's usually schizophrenics who hear voices hurt somebody else. But when they're feeling great, it's often delusions of grandeur. So it's feeling invulnerable. It's feeling like you've got a special mission on Earth to save humanity. I even heard something about saving all the kittens.
Mm-hmm. I kind of feel like that sometimes.
It's often very happy. You think
like save all the animals.
You do, yeah.
Kittens,
well, you did.
dogs.
You rescued dogs for a long time.
Yeah, I love that. I'm
So-
actually hoping to get another dog at some point, but still talking to the husband about it. Verdict's out. Maybe someday the
Convince
puppy could
Paul.
be on the podcast.
I bet you could convince your kids,
Yes.
and then maybe you can overwhelm
yeah.
Paul with a show of force.
Using the guidelines.
So anyways, yeah, delusions of grandeur. I'm Jesus Christ sent here to save the world. I can fly. Of course, that isn't a good one.
No.
So psychosis goes along with it. So that looks like schizophrenia to a lot of the untrained observer or the trained observer who isn't thinking critically, or in the older days when they didn't recognize bipolar disorder so well.
And sometimes too, I don't know how common it is, but a tendency to I don't know if you call it rapid onset interest in religion almost
Yes.
during manic episodes and get really into
Spirituality.
messages or spirituality of all sorts.
Absolutely. And sexuality.
Yep.
So sexual drive on overdrive.
Shopping.
Buying way too much stuff.
Yeah.
And not just too much stuff, but like, I'm going to buy a yacht.
Yep.
Or I'm going to go into CVS and fill 2 shopping carts.
Right. Or get online and order replicas of alligators.
For example.
Yeah, I read a book. Good memoir.
Seriously?
I forget the lady's name. She's very big in the field. I'm blanking. She wrote maybe something fire, but she wrote about her.
I think I've heard that.
She's in the field, and she wrote about her personal experience, and it was very intense. Really good, though. It kind of brings you there. I'll put a link up somewhere.
You're my literary source. Victoria actually reads books, which is nice because embarrassingly, I haven't read enough, but usually come up with some kind of reference.
Yeah, I got to get better remembering the titles.
No, that's good.
My homework for our podcast.
Okay. Suicidality. Suicide attempts with bipolar disorder are often very serious. So I talked to you before about we often ask kids or older kids in particular, they've thought of suicide. What have you thought of doing? And you'll hear a lot of times, choking myself with my hands or
Walking into the pond.
cutting myself or, walking in the pond. Overdose is a tough one because that can be very serious too. I don't mean to dismiss everything else, but with bipolar disorder, it's usually violent. It's I'm going to hang myself or I've tried to hang myself. And it's not like some kids, a ribbon from in the closet or something. It's clearly not going to work. It's like rope in the shed or shooting themselves or stabbing or, they'll actually do it. So it's usually much more violent. And people can feel, my father talks about the casual acceptance of death,
Yeah.
which is folks looking
Totally
saying,
okay.
Yeah, you know what? I think today's a good day to kill myself.
There's no real reason. There's no.
No. Or I kind of want to be part of the universe. So in manic episodes too, they'll kill themselves. Yeah. So very dangerous.
You can see as a parent how horrifying it could be to, hear that diagnosis if you have a child who a doctor is thinking that might be what's going on.
Good point. And I should add that we're talking sort of
The extreme end of it.
Yeah, but it's important to know this stuff and to take this stuff seriously in younger kids as well, and not just dismiss it.
Yeah.
So let me get to mixed real quick.
Yeah.
Mixed is the way it often presents, which is it's like a depression on overdrive. So it looks like anxiety, really bad anxiety. It doesn't get better with other treatment, or it looks like anger,
Irritability.
and occasionally it looks kind of fine. And somebody says they're really depressed, but they don't look it.
Yep.
This is that people can take you very much by surprise. So mixed episodes are more common than anything else. They'll present with just intractable anxiety or anger that's way out of proportion.
And it often is like a physical thing too, like with the way people describe it, right? Like revved up,
Yeah.
like almost like that vibrating.
Yep. Can't slow the thoughts down. Can't sleep.
Yep. And it isn't good.
No.
It's not pleasurable, but it's the mania mixed in with the depression, you'd say?
Yep.
All at once.
Correct. That very frequently gets diagnosed as depression.
Do they know what's going on in the brain?
Nope.
Not yet. Not yet.
But we have meds at work, so I guess we have some indirect
Is there a med
evidence.
for that?
There's a med for this. Yeah, there are 3 meds for this. Bipolar disorder is very often a multi-med problem. I'm going to just talk about my experience.
3-legged stool.
3-legged stool, exactly. Mood stabilizers, the most important. Those are usually anti-seizure medicines. So there's some thought, that sort of makes intuitive sense that your brain's sort of in seizure all the time, right? So meds that are used for seizures, carbamazepine, oxcarbazepine, Depakote, Lamictal. I'm not paid by any of these companies, by the way. Those work.
They don't even give
really
you free
well.
lunches anymore.
They don't. No, they're too careful.
No sponsors.
No sponsors.
No sponsors. But lithium's another one that's very good. You have to monitor more kidney functions, thyroid, that kind of thing. So it's used a little less. But mood stabilizer by itself often doesn't do it. I often add an antidepressant. Some docs are allergic to the idea of antidepressants with a bipolar disorder because the thought is it can make people manic. I haven't had that in my experience using them with mood stabilizers.
Okay, it's the combination.
Yeah, and it's true. If you misdiagnose bipolar disorder and you think it's just depression, you give an antidepressant, there is some
You get
frequency of
activated.
getting revved up.
Yep.
It's one way to diagnose it.
Right.
And then often an antipsychotic. And the antipsychotic is used both because they sort of flirt with psychosis and sometimes are floridly psychotic. But even if they're not, the antipsychotics seem to calm down the thinking a little bit in a good way. So I often use all 3 together. And some people cry, that's polypharmacy, it's dangerous, but it's worked the best for me, low doses of
Low dose.
3 meds or so. So in adults, it's part of the reason that bipolar is so fun and I can enjoy treating it is it's very fixable. And with treatment, you can often just eliminate and people can just enjoy the fruits of the positive sides of bipolar. They often come off meds because they miss the mania, so that's dangerous. But there's a med for that. So this was sort of a quick overview of adult bipolar disorder that I thought was necessary to lay the foundation for talking about kid bipolar, whatever that
Definitely.
is. So
Yeah, which we'll get to next week.
yeah.
All right. Thank you,
So,
Duncan.
Thanks, Victoria.
Yeah, a lot of good information today.
Good. Let's do another one.
All right, I'm ready.
Okay.
Bye, folks.
Bye.